Hello everyone and welcome back to the next presentation. Very excited to have C-RAD with us today and the CEO, Tim Turn, to present the company. And I'll leave it over right away to you, Tim.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Turn and I'm looking forward to present C-RAD to you. So next slide. Would like to start with a short introduction of C-RAD. What we provide is exceptional high precision, safety and efficiency in advanced radiation therapy. C-RAD is about 70 employees strong. Last year we had a revenue of 260 million SEK and delivered an operating profit margin of around 14%. Next slide. Cancer is among the leading causes for death worldwide. In 2020, there were about 18 million new cancer cases diagnosed, and about half of the patients could be treated. Only half of the patients could be treated. But it is expected that this number is to rise until 2040 to about 29 million new cancer cases. So a dramatic increase. And essentially, there are three ways of how cancer is treated nowadays. One is surgery, one is chemotherapy, and then the third pillar is radiation therapy. And C-RAD, with its product, with its solution, is focusing entirely on the radiation therapy. Next slide. So if we look at the cost benefit of the C-RAD solution, if we look at the typical investment for a treatment room, for a radiation room, the C-RAD solution is priced at about 5% of an investment for such a radiation treatment room. And what the customers get is patient safety and enhanced efficiency. And let me give you an example. Breast treatment or breast cancer treatment is one of the common indications where radiation therapy is used. With the C-RAD solution, the risk for radiation damages, in the case of breast cancer, to the heart is significantly decreased. And if we look at the efficiency, one of the huge challenges in cancer care in general is access to radiation therapy. And what I mean by that is there is a huge unmet demand in radiation therapy capacity. With the C-RAD solutions, we are able to treat the patients, or the customers are able to treat the patients faster, and by that treat more patients on the existing equipment, hence increasing the efficiency. Looking at the cost benefit, typically customers see this as a strong benefit. Depending on their clinical profile, they might focus either on the patient safety or on the efficiency part, but nonetheless, the system goes for both in both directions. If we go to the next slide. We believe strongly that this technology is becoming standard of care. And when we mean standard of care, it means that essentially in our target markets, all linear accelerators, or the large majority of the linear accelerators, is going to be equipped with surface tracking. And if I may give an example, when we look at the tenders that are published in the Western world, and for example in Scandinavia, we can see that over the last year there was a very strong development, and by now essentially all tenders that are published are including surface tracking, also the C-RAD technology, or technology like ours, as a requirement. Not all markets are as sophisticated as the Scandinavian market. However, we clearly see a trend towards a higher adoption of surface tracking in the developed markets. Another very good example is a tender that is published in Spain, and we are also expecting another tender in Italy coming up soon, where we see that the government made surface tracking as a mandatory part of the whole tender. So if we go to the next slide and take the slightly more clinical angle to the standard of care question, I mean, we see a very strong development of the adoption of our technology from 2015 over the years. Whereas 5 years back, or in 2015, the technology surface tracking was primarily used for breast treatments, which was already a very important and huge indication. We see that now the customers that have adopted our technology are using it on 70% or more than 70%, if not on all their patients, to support the treatment. So the technology has certainly developed from a niche solution towards a solution that can be adopted for almost all patients. If we move to the next slide and look at the global market. Today, there are around 15,000 Linux installed worldwide. If we look at the different markets and how sophisticated the markets are, we are saying that we are focusing our activities on what we call the advanced market, which stand for approximately 70% or around 10,000 linear accelerators. If we think about making it standard of care, it can probably be debated if it's 100% of the Linux or if it's 75 or 80%. But if we take a bit of a conservative approach and say it is going to be 75% of the Linux, we see and look at an addressable market of around 8,000 units. If we then in return also see how many units are already installed, we see that there is a market penetration of around 30% across all vendors, not only C-RAD, but across all vendors, leaving us with an opportunity to sell another around 5,500 surface tracking systems, either as a retrofit, meaning on an existing Linux, as an upgrade to an existing Linux, or as part of a Linux replacement together with a new Linux. Next slide. Looking at the market potential, we basically assess it to be based on 3 pillars. It is the business with the new Linux, it is the upgrade business or retrofit business, meaning Linux is already installed and we upgrade the installation with the C-RAD technology. And then the more important part of the business is, or increasingly important part of the business, the service contracts. If we look at the annual number of new Linux sold, we look at around 1,300. If we focus again on the markets that we are primarily interested in, we can say that around 700 Linux are sold in what we call the advanced markets. With the current pricing and price levels on the market, that gives an opportunity of 1 billion SEK on an annual basis. And then we have not looked at the installed base. So the installed base, I mentioned before, around 5,500 Linux that are to be equipped. Again, multiplied with the current prices, average sales prices, we are looking at around 7 billion SEK over time for equipping the installed base. And then last but not least, the service contracts. For us, it is still fairly new business, the service contracts. However, what we see that, and when we look at our peers, they have a service business of around 40%, or in some cases even more than 30% of the total revenue is attributed to the service contract. So, I mean, there is another huge opportunity also in the service business. And what I haven't mentioned is that the radiation therapy market is growing year over year with 6 to 8%. So this opportunity is even growing over time. Move to the next slide. Looking at the last 5 years, C-RAD has been growing with around 18.5% on an annual basis. We had achieved our break even in 2018, and already last year, 2021, we delivered a 40% operating profit margin. Next slide. Taking a look at the competitive landscape, we can say that the market is basically split between 2 vendors. There is 1/3 roughly C-RAD systems and 2/3 from our main competitor, which is Vision-RT, a UK-based company. However, if we look at the number of new installations, the market split for new installation, it looks slightly different. C-RAD is by far more than 1/3 of the new installation are coming from C-RAD. And this is due to the fact that Vision-RT has been cooperating over many years with Varian, and this collaboration has ceased recently, well, 2-3 years back now. And from that perspective, this sales channel was not available for Vision-RT anymore. Whereas C-RAD has focused over the years very much on direct sales, distributor sales, and recently engaged with Elekta. Now Elekta has in certain countries, namely in the US, in Japan, and in China, the opportunity to also promote the C-RAD product as part of their proposition towards the end customer. Next slide. If we look at the value proposition, it is about treatment efficiency, it's about accuracy or precision and safety. There are a couple of studies published over the years that are looking at treatment efficiency improvements based on the C-RAD technology from different angles. And what I'm showing here is two examples, whereas the conventional way of how patients are positioned with a technology which is called cone beam CT, which is basically standard or was the standard, being replaced by surface tracking. And here the improvement is about 80%, whereas a patient positioning with the cone beam CT takes about 5 minutes. The same positioning and the same setup of the patient can be achieved with the C-RAD technology in roughly 1 minute. Another angle to look at the technology from a precision perspective, if we look at the laser-based positioning, which has over many years been the status or standard for customers to set up their patients, we see also an accuracy improvement with the C-RAD technology. And last but not least, the safety aspect. A study published just recently has shown that what they did is they assessed all the incidents that happened over a certain period of time. Excuse me. Sorry. They looked at the databases and the incidents that happened in radiation therapy deliveries and assessed that around 1/5, also 20% of these incidents could be avoided by using surface tracking. So there is definitely a very strong improvement from a safety perspective using and implementing this technology. I guess looking at the overall value proposition, it becomes clear it has clearly developed from a niche solution into a solution that helps in a versatile solution that helps in many aspects in the radiation therapy workflow. Next slide. Looking at the workflow that a typical patient undergoes receiving radiation therapy. The conventional way was that a patient receives around 30 fractions, meaning that the patient needs to come back for receiving radiation 30 days in a row. With the more advanced technologies that supported by C-RAD technology, high precision radiation therapy can be applied, allowing to reduce the number of fractions, meaning how often the patient comes back to receive the radiation significantly. So when we look at stereotactic treatment protocols or hypofractionation, the treatment fraction can be reduced down to 5 fractions, typical protocols for C7, 9, or maybe 10, max 15 fractions. So what we see is that there is a potential for significantly decrease the number of fractions, creating definitely a benefit for the patient, but also, again, the improvement in efficiency for the radiation therapy center. Next slide. Looking at the clinical advantages of the C-RAD technology, it's dose-free. There are alternative solutions, and I mentioned earlier in the presentation cone beam CT, but the C-RAD solution is dose-free. The benefit is less side effects for the patient after the treatment. It is non-invasive, clearly translating into an ease of use advantage for the operator, but certainly also for the patient. It is markerless, creating highest patient comfort, less impact on the clinical workflow. C-RAD has put a lot of effort over the years to have a seamless integration and therewith a usability advantage over other vendors in the space. And last but not least, patient compliance. I mentioned on an earlier slide, customers that have implemented our technologies use it on the large majority of their patients, 70% or more of their patients. If we move on to the next slide. Taking a look at our business model. C-RAD is focusing on advanced radiation therapy clinics, and we approach these customers through 3 different sales channels. Traditionally, C-RAD has been very strong on the direct sales. In all major markets, we have established our direct sales organization, and if I say sales and service organization that are working together with the customers. In certain markets, we have established distributors, which are independent distributors that are selling the equipment on behalf of C-RAD towards the end customer. And the third channel is the industrial partnerships. I mentioned the Electra cooperation already, but there are other partnerships as well, where we are co-marketing our products through the channels of our industrial partners, meaning they have the possibility to offer the solution as part of a bigger package towards the end customer. And this is really where we see the huge opportunity now for us also moving forward, because there we have the possibility to scale the business. Looking at the competence that we have in-house, it is primarily focused on the development, on the product knowledge. Of course, sales and service. Service is becoming more and more important. I mentioned it earlier. The production is entirely outsourced, also again giving us the opportunity to further scale the business moving forward. Next slide. If we look at the service business, and here looking at the attachment rates by region, in the US, we see a very service-friendly market, meaning that large majority, and I'm speaking here about 90+% of our customers are adopting or signing up for a service contract to service or outsource the service for the product to the manufacturer, to C-RAD. In Europe, we are at around 60%, a little bit north of 60%. And the APAC region, we see a little bit of a different picture. Depending on the market, we have, for example, Japan and Australia, which are certainly very sophisticated markets, where the large majority of the customers is signing up for a service contract. But we have also markets like China, for example, where customers are not yet adopting service contracts from the manufacturer in the same way as we see it in other markets. The service business is important for us, has over the last year shown high growth rates, which is certainly a positive indication and the confirmation that the customer want to engage in a long-term relationship with C-RAD. For us, it is an interesting business, as it is a long-term commitment. Typically, service contracts last 3 to 5 years, and the customer pays on an annual basis a certain percentage of the initial purchasing price to C-RAD. Next slide. Perhaps taking a look at the result from a financial perspective of our service business in the first quarter this year. The order intake increased or basically tripled compared to the previous year. So that is certainly a significant improvement related to the overall development and the adoption or the increasing adoption of service contracts, but also we had 2 large orders received during the first quarter where the customer at the point of sale already signed up for a service contract. For us, important KPI is the percentage of the service business of the total revenue. And that's what we see on the chart here on the right side. We are tracking this since 2018, where the service percentage was close to 4%. And now in the first quarter 2022, we reached around 18%, which I need to say is partly related to lower product revenue, but we clearly see the trend going in the right direction. And as I mentioned earlier, if we look at the peer group, other companies, other suppliers in radiation therapy, they have a service business that is about half of their total revenue. So certainly still a potential for us to grow in this area. Next slide. Let me move on to the next slide. If we look at our growth strategy, it is based on 3 pillars. It's the product excellence, it's the sales excellence, and the service excellence. We spoke already about the service piece. From a product perspective, I think the technology, the base technology is well developed. We have a clear understanding. We have a clinical proof. We have many proof points for the certain application that we want to use the technology for. From our perspective, the next step is now to expand our product portfolio in neighboring areas. And what we are looking at is right now we are looking at expanding our product portfolio towards workflow management. Sales excellence, with the product being established in the market, the customers know about service tracking. A large part of our future success is dependent on our ability to roll out the message, to get in contact with as many customers as possible, to get them excited about the C-RAD technology. And that is what we are doing right now, both from a sales perspective, but also from a marketing perspective. Meaning, if the technology is on its way to become standard of care, essentially all customers out there sooner or later will be interested in this technology. We move on. Taking a quick look at the financial highlights from last year, order intake increased by around 13% during 2021 over 2020. Revenue increased by 18%. And last year we delivered an operating income of 36 million SEK or 17%. 36 million SEK or 14%. Next slide. Looking at the financial highlights from the first quarter, we certainly had a very good start from an order intake perspective, and as a matter of fact, also from a revenue perspective in all regions except for China. And I guess we are all aware of the current situation with ongoing COVID lockdowns that is clearly affecting also our business. China, being an important market for us, was very much restricting our ability to continue to deliver systems to the Chinese market. And as a consequence of that, revenue decreased with 6% in the first quarter. We move on to the next slide. And perhaps to dive a little bit deeper in this China situation, what we see is that in all major cities there are ongoing lockdowns. It's partly temporary, but partly, like in Shanghai, for example, already since 2.5 months. And that has certainly also affected our distributor that is selling our products across China. And as a consequence, as they were not able to install the systems and did not receive the payments from the customer, we stopped deliveries to the Chinese market in Q1. And that is the reason why we had such an impact on the revenue side during the first quarter this year. However, we are very optimistic about the mid and long-term perspective. If we take a look at the COVID lockdown, I mean, we believe this is a temporary effect and we will get through the situation, and the opportunity in the Chinese market is very important, and we see a lot of potential for C-RAD. And as a consequence of that, we have decided to take the chance now to further invest into our local sales organization and strengthen our sales team in this very important market. Next slide. Looking at the development of revenue and operating profit over the last years by quarter, we clearly see a seasonality pattern, which usually has a weaker first half of the year and then a stronger second half and a very strong fourth quarter. This is both affecting order intake, but also revenue. But what we also see is clearly a trend going in the right direction. I think we as a company have achieved or reached a point of showing clinical proof of our technology. Customers are adopting the technology, and in the context of making this technology standard of care, we see clearly a positive development. Next slide. To sum up the presentation, C-RAD is doing something important for society in the fight against cancer. C-RAD has already a proven and recognized product with more than 1,000 systems installed out there in the market. With the measures that we have taken over the last year, starting with direct sales and then developing distributor, but also industrial partners, we do have a comprehensive market access in all relevant markets. And we believe surface tracking is becoming standard of care. That gives us a significant growth potential. And last but not least, C-RAD has a very stable financial platform. And I think I close the presentation, but I do believe we have still a few minutes for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an interesting presentation, Tim. And we're a bit short on time, but I'm going to squeeze in at least one question. And I think the sort of tender processes going on in Europe is quite interesting and a potential trigger for the share as well in the short term. So maybe if we could talk a bit about that. So thinking about the Spain and Italy tenders, that's combined 160 Linux, if I remember correctly. And then thinking about Croatia and Poland as well, that's possibly close to 200 there as well. But this would mean a revenue potential of north of 150 million. But how should we think about attachment rates to these Linux? Are they required, all of them, to use SGRT? And then also, how should we think about competition from Vision RT, and what sort of market share you expect?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in both cases, or in the Spain case, I mean, all Linux are supposed to be equipped with surface tracking technology, and then it is still the competitive question. So I think in Spain we face certainly a competitive situation, and so we will also in Italy. Having this said, I do believe that especially in the Italy case, we are in a very good position with the C-RAD product. We have done a lot of market development over the past years. In Italy, C-RAD is already market leader, by far market leader when it comes to surface tracking. So we see this as an important opportunity for us, not only for this year. I think from a revenue perspective, we are more looking at the next year. But nevertheless, I mean, we will see the orders developing. I think Spain has already made good progress to develop this project, and it will be interesting to follow this moving forward.
I agree. And just to dwell in a bit more, I mean, do you expect to see the sort of 60% attachment rate of service in these markets as well? Or is the south of Europe a bit lower on that part?
So I think that is a question that I can't answer to the full extent at this moment. I mean, Spain, for example, there it is mandatory to have service contracts. So, I mean, there we can expect that the large majority of the customers is going for some form of service contract. Having this said, Italy is a little bit in a different position. What we expect is that the service contracts, based on the history and the experience in this market, that service contract discussion is coming into play once the warranty has expired. The warranty of the system has expired. So typically the service contracts in these markets are not negotiated at the time of the product sales.
Okay, very interesting. Always nice to hear about C-RAD, and thank you very much for doing this presentation with us. We need to wrap up now, but in about 2 minutes we will return with a presentation from Catella. Thank you very much.
Thank you.